Hello, this is a video on FIN3702, and it's going to take you through study unit 2 on capital budgeting techniques. So in the previous video, I ended up by asking you to look at this practice question that I gave you. And this practice question wanted you to calculate the initial investments, the operating cash flow, and the terminal cash flow. So I hope you were able to do that homework. The calculation for the initial investment is up on the screen right here. So just go through, you can put on pause, and then you can compare this calculation with what you've done. Basically, you had to get the initial investment, and I've put all the information summarized here with regards to that question. So hopefully you were able to do that. And the second part of the question wanted you to calculate the operating cash flow. And then the calculating for the operating cash flow is also up on the screen. So these are the answers to this particular question that I asked you to look at. If you hadn't looked at it, you can put it on pause, work through it, and then look at these solutions to see if you get the same answer. And lastly, this is the solution for the terminal cash flow right here. So you can just go through that question, look at the notes that I put up, try to see if you can get the same answers. See, we don't encourage people to be passive when it comes to learning. You should try these questions, try to see if you can follow everything happening, and try to see if you can get the same answers as the answers that I got here. If you struggle somewhere or you can't follow where a certain number is coming from, please let me know, and I will gladly get back to you and tell you. Right. Today's this video actually is going to focus more on capital budgeting techniques, right? So let's say we have calculated the cash flows associated with our project. Let's say we've calculated the cash flows associated with our project. The next thing we have to do is to actually decide whether or not to invest in the project, right? So we have what we call capital budgeting techniques. And capital budgeting techniques, these are techniques that can be used to decide whether or not to invest in a capital project. So once you've calculated your cash flows, your initial investments, the operating cash flows, and the terminal cash flow, you now have to use one of these 6 techniques to decide whether or not to invest in a capital project. So I'm going to take you through how to calculate each of these techniques, right? And then in the next video, I'll take you through the theory associated with how to calculate each of these techniques. Okay. So the first capital budgeting technique you need to know about is the net present value, then the internal rate of return, then the annualized net present value profitability index, and the payback. And for each of these techniques, you need to know how to do the calculations involved. In other words, how to calculate each of these. And you also have to know the theory behind each of these techniques, the theory behind the NPV, IRR, ANPV, PI, and profitability index. So to take you through these capital budgeting techniques, I'm going to use these answers that we obtained for the homework that I gave you. I'm going to use this initial investment. I'm going to use these operating cash flows, and I'm going to use this terminal cash flow to show you how, once you have those, how you can use them to decide whether or not to invest in a project. So the first technique I'm going to take you through is the net present value. I'm going to show you how to calculate the net present value. So it's the first capital budgeting technique. To calculate the net present value, we use the initial investment, the operating cash flows, and the terminal cash flow. And we also need what we call a discount rate. So if you want to calculate your NPV, you need to have your initial investment, your operating cash flows, your terminal cash flow, and you need a discount rate, right? So in this case, we're going to assume that the discount rate is 10%, right? So to do this calculation, you use your financial calculator. you use your financial calculator. And the way you use your financial calculator depends on the type of financial calculator you have. So the first cash flow we'll put into the calculator is a negative 214,500. Then the second one is 29,800. So the first cash flow you always put into your calculator is the initial investment. And then after that, you put in your operating cash flows. And then the last cash flow that you put into your calculator will be your operating cash flow plus your terminal cash flow. So the last cash flow always includes the terminal cash flow because you get money from selling the asset at the end of its life. And then you enter in your interest rate, and then you calculate your NPV. So let me show you how you would approach this if you are using the two types of calculators that we have, right? Okay. So I'll first take you through this calculation, explaining how you would use this HP that's on the screen right now, right? So, right. So with this HP, let's say you want to calculate NPV. The first thing you need to do, you need to press the red shift button. Then you press the C button, red shift and C. Your calculator should be on 1 PYR. The calculator should have 1 PYR. It should read 1 PYR. I think it should be something like this. If your calculator is on 12 PYR, you will get wrong answer. So you need to fix that. You need to put your calculator on 1 PYR, not 12 PYR. Now, to put your calculator on 1 PYR, if it's not there, you simply press 1, then you press the red shift button, then you press the PMT PYR button. So you simply press 1, red shift button, then you press the PMT PYR button. And then once you've done that, you now enter in each of your cash flows. You say 214550, and then you press plus minus to make it negative. Then you press CF, right? So you've entered in the first cash flow, which is the initial investment. Then you say 29,800, and you press CF again. And then because the cash flow that we keep entering is the same, you don't have to keep pressing 29,800 and then CF to keep entering in the cash flows. You can just keep pressing CF until you get up to, you can press it 9 times so that you put in the first 9 cash flows. And then when it's at CF9, after CF9, you then just press 53,300. Then you press CF for the last cash flow. Then you say 10, you press your interest rate. Then you say red shift button, PRC NPV, then you get your answer. So that's how you can calculate your NPV. Each time you enter in your cash flow, you just press CF, and then after that, you press 10 for the interest, and then red shift button, and then NPV. Okay. If you are using this sharp right here, it's a bit different. First of all, you have to clear your memory. You press second function, then you press alpha, then you press 0 2 times, right? And then after that, you enter in your initial investment, 2214500, and you press this button plus minus to make it negative. Then you press enter. Then you press 29,800, then you press enter again, and it will say CF1. Then 29,800, enter again, and it will say CF2. So you don't have to keep pressing 29,800 since it's the same amount. You can just keep pressing enter up until you get up to 9, meaning you've entered in 29,800 9 times. Then you enter 53,300, which is the last cash flow, the operating and the terminal. Then you punch in 10, you press the I over Y button, and then you say second function, you go to CFI cash, then you press the down arrow, then you compute, and it will give you the NPV. So if you do that correctly, you should then get an NPV of minus 22,331.63. And when it comes to the NPV, we accept the project if its NPV is positive, and we reject the project if its NPV is negative. So in this case, because the NPV is negative, we reject the project. So in the next video, I'll take you through the theory behind this. So in this case, we reject the project because the NPV is negative. Okay. Then the next capital budgeting technique you need to know about is the internal rate of return. And to calculate the internal rate of return, you need the initial investment, the operating cash flows, and the terminal cash flow. So here you don't need a discount rate. You just need a discount rate when making the decision, but you don't input it into your financial calculator. So to calculate the internal rate of return, we do exactly the same as the approach that I told you with regards to the NPV. You enter in your initial investment as a negative, then CFO. Then you enter in each of your operating cash flows, right? 9 times. And then after that, you enter 53,300, which is the last cash flow associated with the operating cash flow and terminal cash flow. Then you just press the red shift button and you get your IRR. Let me show you that through a diagram. So with this calculator, let me put it up on the screen. Okay. So with this calculator, you would start by entering in your initial investment, which is 22,214,500. Then you put plus minus as a negative and you press enter. Then 29,800, right? And you put that in. 29,800 enter. Then you keep pressing enter 9 times because it's the same amount up to CF9. Then you enter 53,300 as CF10. Then to get your internal rate of return, you simply say second function, and then you come to cash CFI. Then you simply press compute, and you'll get your internal rate of return. Right. With the other calculator, let me put that one up. With the other calculator, which is the HP, with the HP, you first press the red shift button and then clear to make sure that your memory is clear. Then you enter in your initial investment, which is 214,500. Then you press this button to make it a negative. Then you press CFJ, then 29,800 CFJ. Then you just keep pressing CFJ up to CF9, meaning you've entered in 29,809 times. Then after that, you enter in 53,300 and then CF to get CF10. Then you press the red shift button and you come to CST IRR. Then it gives you the internal rate of return, right? So you should then get 7.64. And then with the internal rate of return, we accept the project if the internal rate of return is greater than the discount rate, and we reject the project if the internal rate of return is less than the discount rate. So in this case, our internal rate of return is less than 10%, so we reject the project because the IRR is less than the discount rate. Then the third capital budgeting technique you need to know about is the annualized net present value. And to calculate the annualized net present value, we use the NPV, the useful life of the asset, and the discount rate. So we assume a discount rate of 10%, right? So we use the NPV, the useful life of the asset, and the discount rate. So using our financial calculator, we take our NPV, the NPV that we got before, this one, and we put that NPV as a PV into our financial calculator. Then we take the useful life of the asset, which is 10 years, and we put that as N, right? And then we take the discount rate, we put that as I over YR, and then we calculate our PMT. So you just enter in each of these amounts into your calculator, and then you press PMT and you get this answer, right? So it will also depend again with the calculator that you're using. With this calculator, you are simply inputting everything, and then you simply press PMT to get your answer. But with this sharp, before you first input in everything, but before you press PMT, you press compute. So you say compute PMT to get the answer, right? So in this case, there's something important you need to note. If your NPV is negative, it means that the annualized net present value will also be negative, right? And if your NPV is positive, it means that the annualized net present value will also be positive. Don't be confused by the different signs that your financial calculator can give you. All you need to remember is that your annualized net present value is always the same sign as the NPV. Whatever sign you add in the NPV is the sign that you will have with the annualized net present value. And with regards to the ANPV, we accept a project if the ANPV is positive, and we reject a project if the ANPV is negative. So in this case, we reject the project because our ANPV is negative. And remember, the ANPV will always be the same sign as the NPV that you got. Then the fourth capital budgeting technique is the profitability index. The profitability index uses the NPV and the initial investment to calculate the profitability index. And here you don't need a financial calculator. You simply just take your NPV plus the initial investment divided by the initial investment, and this gives you the profitability index. So in this case, we would just take our NPV, which is minus 22,331, plus the initial investment of 214,500 divided by 214,500, and that gives us 0.896. So that would be the profitability index. And another way of looking at this, the NPV plus initial investment. NPV plus initial investment is also just called the present value of the cash inflow. So if you get a question like this in an exam or in an assignment, if they say the present value of the cash inflows is this amount, it means that they've already added the NPV and the initial investment for you. So here we get a profitability index of 0.896. And then with the profitability index, we accept a project if the profitability index is greater than 1, and we reject a project if the profitability index is less than 1. So in this case, because our profitability index is less than 1, we reject the project, right? And then the last capital budgeting technique you need to know about is the payback. So I'm going to go through the theory behind all these techniques in the next video. Yeah, I'm just taking you through the calculations based on a capital budgeting cash flow question, just how you would finish it off. So with the payback, we need there's supposed to be a B here, PB. With the payback period, we use the initial investment on the operating cash flow, and the payback gives us the number of years it takes for a company to recover its initial investment. Most of the time, the question you'll get will have uniform operating cash flows. For example, here, our cash flows are the same each year. So we say these are uniform operating cash flows. It's 29,800 over the life of the project, right? So these cash flows are uniform. So if you have uniform operating cash flows, to calculate your payback, you simply take your initial investment divided by the uniform operating cash flows. So in this case, it will be 214,500 divided by 29,800, and you get 7.2 years. But sometimes you might have non-uniform cash flows, and I'll talk about that next. I'll talk if you look at the assignment solutions, actually, for assignment 1, I think question 2, there's an example on that. You can see how we would calculate payback if we have cash flows which are not uniform. And then with the payback, we accept a project if the payback is less than the target payback. So a company will usually have a target payback and we accept a project if the payback we calculate is less than what the company is targeting, and we reject a project if the payback we calculate is more than the target payback, than the payback we are targeting. So if we assume, for example, in this question that the target payback is 5 years, we would reject the project because the payback that we calculated is more than the target payback, right? So these are the 6 important capital budgeting techniques you might be asked to calculate and to use them to make decisions after having calculated the capital budgeting cash flows. So in the next video, I'll take you through the theory behind these techniques. So just make sure you know how to use these techniques after obtaining your cash flows and how to use the techniques to make a decision. But you also have to know the theory behind these techniques, and I'll take you through the theory in 2 videos that follow. So as usual, if you have any questions with regards to what I was taking you through, my number is on the screen. Please feel free to let me know. And I might not always be able to respond promptly, but I'll try to get back to you. Thank you.